In this presentation, I'm going to speak about three things. I'm going to speak about the Asia-Pacific data center ecosystem, as well as the cloud ecosystem, and position Malaysia within it. I'm going to talk about the trends and insights that we're seeing at JLL at an APAC level, and then I'm going to drop them down into the Malaysian ecosystem as well, so make it specific to Malaysia. And quite a lot of the APAC trends that we see actually cross over between the region and Malaysia. And then finally, I'm going to, at the end of my presentation, also throughout the presentation, I'm actually going to talk about the opportunities that exist within the Malaysian market, in particular for the operators, but by association for investors and in adjacencies to enterprises. Now, I'm a regional analyst, so my strength is actually looking across markets. So that's what I'm going to do in this presentation. But wherever I can, I'll drop down into the Malaysian market as best as I can. I'm an outsider, and quite often it's useful for an outsider to kind of reflect back your country or your market back onto you. So when I give a presentation in a market, I'll actually go to research and search and try and find those sorts of indicators that I think are interesting in understanding a particular economy or a particular market. So JLL has lots and lots of subscriptions to different research products, and I've pulled some of these numbers from some of those subscriptions. They're basically categorized into three areas. So the first is Malaysian internet behavior. The second is the appetite for applications, so within the country. And then finally, a data point around power generation, which I've actually got from somewhere else. So, and probably what I'll do here is I've done some presentations recently in Vietnam and Indonesia, and so I'll probably compare and contrast some of these to give you a sense of what your country is doing relative to some of the other countries within the region. So the first data point I always start with is the population. So Malaysia's hit about 33.5 million people. And that's important because it's what drives the local digital ecosystem. Now, that's a relatively good population for Southeast Asia. But just to give you a sense of what's going on in other markets, so in Vietnam, their population's at 100 million. And Indonesia, it's now at 270 million. And why that's significant is that Indonesia's population in the last 15 or so years has actually grown by your population. So in 15 years, it's basically taken the population of Malaysia and dumped it in Indonesia and increased their population by that much. So that's important, obviously, in terms of demand. So that's really, really interesting. Around internet behavior, I mean, you've got this reasonable sized, medium-sized sort of population, and in terms of actual digital sort of coverage, you've got, greater than 95% mobile network coverage from your telcos. Most people have got a mobile phone, and they're using that to access the internet. So 89% of mobile internet users are using their mobile phone to access the internet. And this is really, really interesting. You spend, on average, about 8 hours per day using the internet, and quite often that's on your phone. So that's actually your usage of internet behavior. Now, I like to look at the application ecosystem within a particular market because it gives you a sense of, one, demand, and then two, of where the demand is, I guess, at the retail end, and then where it's going in terms of the operators. Now, the sorts of application classes I usually look at are like e-commerce sites, e-wallets, ride sharing, dating apps, these sorts of applications. And it was interesting this morning that one spoke about the 9 different sectors that MDEC are kind of focusing on. So Malaysia's got a particular strategy in terms of those sectors, and I haven't actually picked them up yet. But in terms of the application ecosystem that I've been looking at in other markets, what I'm seeing is basically a strong Western ecosystem. So if you look at your social media platforms, most of them are basically sort of Western providers, so Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, probably not surprisingly, very, very strong in terms of social media application site. In e-commerce sites, you're starting to see some of the Malaysian providers come through, so you've got some representation in there in your e-commerce sites. And it's good to see also that there's applications around e-wallet services, so touch and go in particular comes to mind. So really, really good coverage and adoption by your local market for these sorts of applications. I think the danger for the Malaysian economy, when I look at it compared to, let's say, Indonesia or Vietnam, those markets have got a very, very active homegrown application ecosystem. I don't know if that's because of what they're doing. Part of it's generated by language and culture, and part of that I think is based on need. But the country needs to be very, very careful that applications are not sort of homegrown in Malaysia and then move to Singapore, and then Singapore takes them up and the workloads move there. Now, finally, on power generation, there's been a lot of discussion today about green data centres, innovation in data centres and sustainable energy. I actually put this last data point from a site, iea.org, which is an energy site, and I put these numbers together from the numbers that were on a particular slide. And I don't know how accurate, I think the site's pretty accurate, but it'd be interesting to get some feedback perhaps after this presentation. But it looks as though most of your energy is being generated from non-sustainable sources, okay? So from natural gas, oil and coal at the moment. Now that's very, very surprising, because if I look across the rest of the region, particularly Vietnam, so almost close to 50% of Vietnam's power generation now is coming from sustainable resources. Indonesia's around 13% and it's pushing up higher. So this is a real issue. We've talked a lot about sustainability, but we need to address this issue of where the power is actually coming from. I want to talk about so just in terms of the trends and insights that we're seeing across the region. So I'm not actually going to take you through all of these because there's too many for the time that we've got. I just want to zero in on 3. So when I'm looking at the data center space, what's driving the market? What's driving the regional data center market, and what's driving the Malaysian market? And when I think about it, 3 in particular stand out. The first is cloud and cloud-related services. So the big trend, the big thing that's happened in the last, let's say, 5 or so years has been the emergence of the big 5 to 7 cloud players and hyperscalers. So these companies are driving a lot of the investment, they are driving a lot of the innovation in the market, and they're building out data center footprints from core in their home countries to regional hubs and to the edge, into the edge markets. So that's really, really important. The second key insight or trend that I'm seeing is around sustainability and energy efficiency, and a lot of that relates to government regulation. So we've talked a lot about that today as well. We've got national governments that are driving or forcing or encouraging operators to make their data centers more efficient and to use more sustainable energy. And finally, the last point around edge or modular data centers. So we're seeing lots and lots of build out of the data center footprint to the edge. Now that edge may be national hubs, so capital cities or tier 2 cities, or increasingly we're starting to see data centers push out to the deep edge or the remote edge within a particular environment. So what's actually driving the market? We talked about cloud, talked about edge, talked about sustainability, government regulation. So what is the thing that is actually pushing it out and actually creating demand regionally and within Malaysia? So essentially it's the mobile phone. Okay, so in the last 5 or 10 years or so, this mobile phone, which is full of all of these different types of applications, has become essentially pervasive across the region. So on the screen here, I've got a graph which shows mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people, and the red arrow is the 100 line. This is actually from the World Bank, from this year World Development Indicators. And what it shows is basically the one-for-one adoption of mobile phones within all the different countries in APAC. And Malaysia is actually quite high there. It's above the midpoint. And so what that essentially is saying is that once you go above that 100 line, you've basically got one mobile phone per person or one mobile phone subscription per person within the country. So it's a measure, it's a proxy for pervasiveness or adoption or something like that. So Malaysia's way above that 100 point, within 100 to 150, I think. So you've got, this mobile phone with applications that's driving the market. Now, the mobile phone needs a telco network. Now, in Malaysia and lots of other countries within the region, the telcos, quite often supported by national governments, have built out very, very effective telco networks, okay? So they're basically the backbone for the mobile phone. And so in the last sort of few years, you've had basically a pervasiveness of mobile phones, very, very mature telco networks, so going from 3G to 4G now to 5G, bandwidth's getting bigger, capacity getting bigger. And the thing that hasn't kept up is the data center. Because if you've got a mobile phone with applications, the device is the enabler, the network carries the applications and what the user is doing, but then you need compute and storage and processing all around what's happening on your mobile phone. So the data centers that are enabling this digital ecosystem have been built out to a certain extent within the region. So certainly in the mature or primary markets, but haven't built out to the secondary or even to the edge in a lot of cases. And that's what's actually driving the market and why you're seeing a lot of growth at the moment. So what's happening is that the data center market, particularly in emerging and frontier markets, is playing catch up to basically to consumer and enterprise demand. So it's both coming from you with your mobile phone, it's also coming from your businesses and the organizations that you work with and the applications that are coming from business. It's being hit from both directions. Now what's really, really interesting is that this is just now accelerating, right? So why is it accelerating? Why is it basically accelerating on steroids? It's doing that for two reasons. The first is that we're experiencing continuous innovation of the devices that you're actually using, those mobile devices that run applications. So it's not about anymore just your mobile phone. It's not about your laptop or your tablet. Think now it's about, your fitness devices, your smart watches, smart glasses, these sorts of things, right? All of these different form factors, new form factors that individuals are using all over the place to do different things. So you've got all of this innovation around the end user device. The other interesting thing that's happened that's really, really driving the market, and Jeremy talked about it this morning, is that the nature of the applications is changing. So think artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, all of these different applications that are coming through that are changing the hybrid multi-cloud data center architecture. Jeremy talked about that this morning. Okay, it's changing the complexity and the demands of those applications are changing the way that the data center needs to be architected. And in effect, it's pushing it out to the edge. It's basically making the overall pie bigger and it's pushing that pie out to the edge. So all of these applications that are using machine learning, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, forcing the applications to get smarter, but certainly placing significant demands on, compute demands on the data itself and forcing its growth. The other thing is that we're seeing is that applications are starting to stream more. So it's not just these smart applications, but people these days are starting to consume a lot of content that is bandwidth hungry. And we know that the network is limited, it's expensive, there are latency issues. So you're seeing more and more streaming type applications, whether it's video streaming, music, social media applications such as TikTok, that require stronger network connectivity. And essentially what's happening is that these applications are forcing compute closer and closer to the edge. So I guess a good example of that is, like, let's say you're driving a smart car and you put the smart car on automatic pilot and you're driving down the road and the car detects a kangaroo. Okay, so in the car, a kangaroo or a cow or some sort of animal. So the smart car connects it. Now it sends a signal, so the car senses it and it sends a signal somewhere to do something. Do you want that sensor to send the signal over many, many hops to a data center in New York? Or do you want, if you're out in regional Malaysia, do you want it sent to a data center in KL? Or do you want it sent even closer, right? Because whenever there's hops and the more and more there's network connectivity, it creates issues in terms of being able to respond to it. So you can see as health systems, transport systems get smarter and more mission critical, where the data centers fits will be adjusted accordingly. Now I spoke about the data center market in APAC. So JLL actually talks about 3 tiers of the market. We speak about mature markets, emerging markets, and frontier markets. And I won't go into frontier markets today because it's kind of not relevant to what we were talking about. So essentially, there are the 2 main types of markets: so mature markets and emerging. So mature markets these days have got about 1,000 plus critical supply of IT load. They're in countries that have been some sort of sub-regional hub for the region. They're very, very mature, very, very competitive these days. And the opportunity is very, 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 very different. They're moving to sort of cloud sort of environments. Now, Malaysia is what we would characterize as being an emerging market. So an emerging market is sort of roughly 100 to 200 megawatts. Across these different countries, we're sort of seeing 100 to 200 megawatts of critical IT supply. There's usually a reasonably large sort of domestic population that the country can draw upon. Sometimes there's been sort of impediments to the development of the market. So there's some sort of either infrastructure or political or social sorts of conditions that perhaps have limited the market in some circumstances. And the question is, how do you shift from being an emerging to a mature market? So perhaps the best way to look at it is to look at the way that the mature markets have actually done that. So in the mature market, so when I'm talking about mature market, I'm talking about like Singapore, Sydney, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo. Those markets have gone through 3 stages. The first stage was where the data center was essentially a real estate play. So we're talking about 10 or 15, maybe 15 years or so. And the data centers were often built by property companies, real estate companies, with the mentality that these were another real estate asset class. So it was about the facility, co-location services, basic services. There's a lot of emphasis on the design, the security, engineering standards, these sorts of things. Within a few years, in these mature markets, the market had evolved to what I'd call stage 2. So stage 1 is frontier, stage 2 is emerging, and stage 3 is mature. So within a few years, those markets had shifted because the telcos had realised that there was an opportunity to use their existing sort of telco infrastructure that housed their telco equipment and move into the data centre market and sell value-added services. So certainly in Malaysia, you see, TM1 has been very, very active in that space. So essentially what happened, the market evolved and the facility became not just about the data center, but it became also about connectivity. And you would have heard that from Jeremy this morning. He talked about, Equinix's sort of connectivity sort of play. Much more sophisticated services, hosting, the creation of hubs. And the data center became part of a broader regional or global ecosystem. So it wasn't a single physical facility, it actually became part of a fabric. So these days, data centers are essentially part of a global data center and cloud fabric and need to be viewed that way. Now, this is probably where Malaysia is now, kind of in this stage 2, in that sort of stage 2 sort of network stage, sort of moving into the cloud. So most of the mature markets have got very, very mature cloud markets as well. So this is about having a global cloud footprint that services from your country, pushing out in large countries, pushing out the cloud deeper into the edge, and moving to much more to sort of as a service models. Now, for Malaysia to kind of push into that cloud space, so all the action these days is in cloud. So I'd say maybe 60, 70 or 80% of the action, investment, activity is kind of in that space, is being dominated by that space. So in 2021, according to IDC, Malaysia's public cloud services revenue was around $600 million US, and it's forecast to grow to about 1,800 million US dollars by 2026. So it's a CAGR of about 22.9 or 23%. So it's sort of mid-range in terms of if you compare it to other countries within APAC, but still quite much lower than quite a lot of the mature markets. So your country will grow, but not necessarily at sort of the same rate as the mature markets. And what's interesting, those markets are not going to stop. They're going to grow significantly as well. So I'm just going to jump now, because my time's up. I'm going to jump to where the opportunities are within the market. So, and focus in particular on Malaysia. So Malaysia, as an emerging market, has an opportunity for both retail and wholesale co-location. But because in the last 5 or 10 years, cloud has developed so much, there is a risk that a lot of the enterprises, so a lot of you folk in the audience, will actually skip the co-location phase and move straight to public cloud through born in the cloud policies, or through straight to the cloud policies, or through government incentives or support from MDEC. And that's what we were talking about this morning in the panel with Jeremy. And we had that sort of contrast between Jeremy and Juan, where Juan was talking about some of the policies around MDEC involving public cloud and the success stories there. And Jeremy was talking about, no, a lot of legacy enterprises are not able to do that, and they need to adopt a hybrid multi-cloud environment. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Malaysian market plays out in terms of who will go to public cloud and how many clouds you'll go versus who will adopt this hybrid multi-cloud model. My sense will be that for the foreseeable future, you'll probably have both, and a lot of the legacy traditional companies will stick with a hybrid multi-cloud environment, like Jeremy says. There's a real opportunity for a country like Malaysia and a lot of these sub-regional markets to become hubs in their own right, like Singapore. And it's going to be challenging for Malaysia because of its proximity to Singapore and some of what's going on nowadays in Johor. But really, that's what most countries should be looking for, about how they can actually service other regions in order to grow. The other key thing that we're starting to see now, and the other key opportunity, is around edge markets. So the large cities are certainly going to grow, and we're starting to see bigger and bigger data centers in those environments. But I mentioned that because of the cloud and mobile devices, we're going to see more and more of the data center pushed to the edge. And what's really, really interesting, you'll see a vendor outside as well, I think it's Edge Connects. You're starting to see vendors that come through with very, very small form factors, 1 megawatt sort of container that's hyper-converged, it's got its own power, it's got its own cooling, can even have it come with its own kit, highly ruggedized, drop it in, pull it out. And you're going to start to see more and more of these types of form factors rolled out into, let's say, tier 3 cities, remote islands, mining sites, in order to kind of support all of those new workloads and devices that come through. So this is another opportunity that's not just for Malaysia, but for other parts of the region. The other interesting opportunity for Malaysia, and we're seeing it now, is what's happening around Johor, obviously, with Singapore's data center moratorium. Limited supply of new data centers coming online in Singapore, and 60 megawatts per year being approved as of now, after sort of 3 years, no new approvals. And that's creating lots and lots of opportunity for JB, Johor, as a spillover site. So that in itself is really, really interesting as well. So my time's up, so I'll end the presentation here. Looking forward to continuing the conversation with everybody, or with some people over coffee afterwards. Thank you very much.